Okay. It is Tuesday, April 29th. I mean, April 29th. Where am I getting that from? It is Wednesday, April 10th, and 2019. And I want to welcome each of you to week number 2 of Introduction to Corrections. And I hadn't flipped my calendar, so I just did. And so my name is Richard Wright, and I'm your instructor, professor, as you already know. So I'm going to go ahead and share with you details for this week's assignments. Then I'm going to reiterate about the requirements for the project. And I'm not going to go over the instructor information because you already know that, or the additional course information. And that rubrics are located in each written assignment. Again, some of you have had issues by not making sure that you have your citations in the body and references at the end. And we covered that. And then it also was covered in the academic integrity policy announcement when you saw the video that we provided for you as well, in both an announcement and I covered it in class. And so you see that your lectures are every other Wednesday now. So it's week 2. The next one we'll have is week 4, week 6, week 8, and then finally week 10. And then here is the link for the open house lecture week 1, which has all the elaborate details concerning the requirements for completing the project. And so these announcements stay up: the integrity announcement, helpful resources, APA assistance. Again, I do invite you to make sure you take time to go to that if you're having APA problems. The writing process as well. Welcome announcement is also there. So now let's take a look at the announcement for this week. Sentencing and correctional process is the topic. Chapters 4 of the text. I sent you the PowerPoints for that earlier, or at the end of the week, Saturday, I believe it was. And then we're going to look at the activity sentencing issues and sentencing definitions. And then you know the link, because if you were here, you would see it. And then discussion assignment, goals and philosophy of sentencing. I've graded the discussion post for the past week 1 already, and you should see my comments that I made, letting you know if you did well. If you didn't do well, I'll let you know what you need to do better. And then, of course, you also discovered if you submitted a post Sunday and you hadn't submitted a post prior to Sunday, that you got zeros because the discussion forum was over. That's what we talked about last week, and that's a school policy, as I'm not going to go over the syllabus, but it is located in the syllabus itself. So you want to make sure that your initial post is submitted as of yesterday for goals and philosophy of sentencing, and then your reply post by this Saturday, no later than, I believe that's the 13th, 11:59 p.m. Central Standard Time. And I do encourage you to respond to more than one post. You won't get any additional credit, but what it does do, it provides a more detailed discussion forum for myself and your classmates. And then there is a written assignment. There's actually 2 this week: determinate or indeterminate sentencing. The requirements will be covered in a few minutes. And then, of course, the first of the course project. This is the easiest part here. And I suggested last week that you get on that. And not many of you have started on it now, and it is due by Sunday. You should have selected your agency and provided your contact person. When you provide your contact person, make sure that you don't just put the name there, but you put a method of communicating with them, email and or cell phone or phone to reach them. And I'll be looking at that for all of the points. So that's due Sunday, and we'll go over that more in detail. And then you know my motto, Adversity Springboard Success. You know what that is about, because I covered that in detail in our extensive session last week. So let's look at the course calendar quickly. Course calendar is populating now. There it is. And this is where we are today for live lectures. But you know your reading assignment. Again, if you click on it, it tells you the stuff that I already shared with you. And then your initial post, goals and philosophy of sentencing. Then your live lecture, which again the calendar provides what we do. Lasts at least an hour. Most of the time in this course it won't be an hour. And then it gives the link again. And then the reply post, as I said earlier, the 13th, Saturday. And then the written assignment, which if you click on it, it tells you and it reminds you, be sure to provide the required APA citations and references. And to do an adequate job of preparing for the assignment, which requires 2 pages, be sure to do an adequate job. 2 pages, not 1 1/2. It doesn't count the cover sheet, doesn't count the reference page. And repeating the facts doesn't help satisfy the requirement, because you don't need to repeat the facts. I'm more interested in your critical thinking, your analysis, and I shared with you how you can find more about that. And please, whatever you do, run your papers through Grammarly. You don't have to worry about the course project, at least this assignment for this week, being run through Grammarly, because the requirements are in Module 2 under the assignments and the rubric. So we're going to also cover that as well. And that's it for this week. Next week, you have your reading assignment, and then you have initial post due Tuesday. You have the same thing Saturday for reply post. Same applies. Your written assignment for next week is restorative justice, and it tells you what the requirements are. And again, you will find the requirements in the rubric as well. And then you will discover your first of your quizzes. Your quizzes are timed, and I didn't say that here, but it is timed, and you want to make sure you perform well. And I do recommend that when you do your quiz that you go through all of your materials first, including the PowerPoints that I provide that go with the assignments for that week. Now, let me explain something to you. I am not talking about this Sunday, which is the 14th. I'm just talking about the week of the 21st, because there is no lecture during week 3. Because 15th, Monday the 15th, tax day, will be the day that starts that week. The next lecture will be the following week, which is the 24th. Okay? So make sure you got that point. All right. Now let's close down the course tools here, and let's go into week 2 module. So now let's go over the little bit more detail, the written assignments. It says right up front, a 2-page paper due to following 2 things. First, research research the state in which you reside and report if the state utilizes determinate or indeterminate sentencing. And we're going to talk a little bit about that. Include the basics or philosophy of your state's decision. So you got to cover your state. Second, you're going to argue which of the two types options you believe, despite the fact that whichever one your jurisdiction, even if they have determined and you feel indeterminate is better, then explain why. Make sure you have grammar, spelling, and cite any sources. Remember, your paper should have sources throughout the body of the paper, because sources cited in the paper give credibility to your statements. Because in your papers, you are not experts, and even I, as an expert in it, if I'm going to utilize some information, even if I paraphrase it and write it in my own words, I get the source that I utilized, that I relied upon, where I found the idea or information. So that's throughout the paper. We already talked about APA and its importance, which we will be talking about the whole quarter. And then you know when that assignment is due. Of course, the bottom line is this. You click on that. You see when it is due. As I said, it is this Sunday, 11:59 p.m. Central Standard. And then you view the rubric. And the rubric provides the standards where I grade you. So the content, quality, and accuracy of the information tells you exactly what I just said in the first 2 points, point 1 and point 2. And it tells you the page requirement as well, okay? And then paragraphs. Remember, your paragraphs shouldn't be very, very long. Average 5 to 6 sentences. I've seen papers that students have submitted to me that the whole paper is one lengthy paragraph, for 1 1/2, even to 2 pages. That is not proper organization or grammar, and you will lose points for that. So you want to make sure that at this point you've concentrated on that. Your writing should be better. Now you're in college. And that, of course, your grammar, your mechanics, and that it is constructed with no structural typo errors, grammatical spelling, or punctuation. You have Grammarly to check that, and the Grammarly, and then the plagiarism aspect. And again, it reminds you to meet the 2-page minimum requirement. If you don't meet the 2-page minimum requirement, I will take points off, and you will see those points deducted. There's only 25 points for the assignment. Now, many students lose points because they might put references on the reference page, but they don't put citations in the body. Remember, all sources are properly cited as in-text citations in the body of the paper. Remember, I said that. So remember this. If a source appears on your reference page, it should appear at least one time in the body of the paper at the appropriate place where you provided the information in your paper. And then the sources that are on the reference page should be credible sources, and no Wikipedia, because it's right there, or generic sources. Our library and resource center is there to help you. I already shared that with you, and it's also on your course homepage to help you. So you get 25 points for that. But I can tell you that many of you, and then, by the way, make it double space, and do not submit your papers PDF. Submit them in Word. Let me show you where you see that at. There it is, right there. Save your assignments as a Microsoft Word document. Okay? Mac users, I don't know anything about it, but it tells you what to do. But do not submit a PDF. If you do, I'm going to send you a note back saying you get a 0 until you do it correctly. Now, I have had students who get all the way to the end of the quarter, and they said, oh, I haven't checked my grades. I already talked last week about the importance of checking grades. That should be something that you as a student should monitor to make sure. I can tell you who is monitoring it other than myself are your advisors and or your dean. But your advisors, that's one of their big jobs, is to monitor to see how you're doing. And the school is watching too to see if you're satisfying the 14-day requirement as indicated in the syllabus, which I don't take and monitor that. But the key thing is you need to understand is that your assignments should be done and submitted properly. Okay? So now, let's go back and let's take a look at the next written assignment, which is the first one of your week 1 that I talked about when I talked about the discussion, not discussion, I'm sorry, when I talked about the course project. So let's go down. We already covered the discussion. Let's spend a little time on the course project. Very simple concept. For this, you're going to have in a paragraph or two, describe the agency, and then include a sentence or two as to why you selected the agency. Make sure that you include another paragraph identifying the person to whom you will interview and their contact information. It says, and their contact information. I have students who will submit the name but not the contact information, and you will lose points. Now, this is where you're starting with your transferable skill of communication because you're reaching out to the agency, and you should have done that. I said last week, get started. Some of you are not going to have it. Some of you are going to say, I couldn't reach anybody. That's why I say you need to get on that right away. That's why I stressed that in the lecture I did last Wednesday. So here we are a week later, and if some of you haven't done it by now, usually it's hard to do it on weekends, so you got Thursday and Friday, which is cutting it too close. And some are available Saturday. But the point of the matter is, and don't make up a fictitious person because I will check to be sure, and that's the case. So you should have that part of the assignment done. Notice I didn't say that you had to do citations or references or any of those things because you don't really have to. You can, but it's okay. You won't be held accountable for that here. So again, the rubric for this, it tells you what you have to do, and it breaks it down. Just the same information showing you'll get 10 points for satisfying the information that is elicited in the assignment for selection of agency and contact information and details. And then you get 2 points for submitting paragraphs properly, and this is a very simple one. And then you'll lose 3 points for citations and references, but I'm not really going to be dogmatic about that. But I mean, you could have references and not citations in here, and it's okay. It's okay. And usually what people use as citations is that they will use the name of the agency and or the name of the person as well cited on the reference page. Not the information that's up here at the top part, but on their reference page. All right? So remember, I'm not going to be very dogmatic about it, but I am going to be dogmatic about the content that's required for the 10 points. So what happens oftentimes is people don't supply everything here and they don't get all their points. Here, people usually do not too bad, and here don't. So you want to make sure that you do that. And that's due Sunday, not Monday. If you submit it on Monday, you're going to lose points because it is critical. And you're going to find that the next assignment, which comes up in the week, next time we have a lecture, week 4, and then there's going to be one more assignment, week 7, and then the final submission of the paper is in week 9. So you can't wait until then, because you're going to get grades each of those periods. No one should ever be late with this part of the assignment, and definitely should not be late with week 4, because week 4 does not require you to do any contact with the individual after you've done week 2. So your interview is due week 7, but you want to do it as soon as possible so you can have it, but you don't have to submit it. And then week 9, you tie it all together. And so what I did tell students when we were going over it last week is, remember, each of your individual course project assignments, you should set up a section for your final paper, such as selection of agency/contact person, and provide that information that's asked in here. Don't copy and paste it. Just take it and put it in there and have it as how you start your paper in week 9. Then you're going to do the same thing for the topic in week 4. And then you're going to have an interview section in week 7, and so on. So that's it. That is it. Now, I know some of you don't even listen to the lectures because it's not required, but you need to take advantage of them because I do these additional lectures to help you. I am required to do 1 lecture in this course, and that's I do it in week 1, open house. But I want to help you guys, so I select these lectures, and students don't often come. Some don't even look at the archive. You don't get a point for looking at the archive. You don't get any credit, but what you do gain is additional information that is beneficial to help you navigate this course. And if I'm spending my money, I'm taking up my time in school, I am going to avail myself of every opportunity that my professor makes himself available to provide an instructional information about the assignments and the material for each module. I used to do lectures every week, but because of the way it is today, you can see the attendance. People are going to look at the recording or not. Now, why am I doing this right now? Because I'm saying it. Now, what I'm saying, though, is addressed to people who don't look at it all. But guess what? They won't know because they won't see the lecture. But also, I can tell you something else. They will email me, text me, or call me and ask me questions that if they looked at the lecture, they would know the answer to the information. So I bounced it back to them. And I'm not rude about it. I'm not hostile about it. But, you know, I take the time to do this. So take the time to go through it. It'll be more beneficial for you as well in the long run. Okay, and that's it for the assignments. So now let's go back and let's conclude today by going and talking about looking at the lesson itself, the content, where I get the information that I share with you in addition to what I submitted to you previously. And so we're going to be dealing with the sentencing, determinate and indeterminate sentencing, which is one of your written assignments, and then explain a little bit about mandatory sentencing, truth in sentencing, and so forth. So again, chapter 4 of your text as you're reading along, you have your code to go inside with that, the PowerPoints I previously sent you. So I'm going to talk about sentencing issues in just 1 minute and sentencing definitions. I've already covered these other 3 items here. So let's talk about sentencing issues. So as you have discovered, there are various reasons for sentencing that go from rehabilitation to incapacitation to deterrence to retribution. And the point of the matter is that the sentencing that we have is kind of built upon deterrence. However, though, as you will discover from my comments and even from your research, and when you check the statistics and information, the issue of deterrence is probably ancient and antiquated, and it is clear that it does not work. Now, as you already know, the theme of deterrence operates on the basis that if you do something wrong, you're going to serve some time, and therefore it should deter you or plant some in your mind to keep you or minimize your becoming a recidivist or repeat offender. That's the ideal thing of what it's supposed to. In other words, punishment is supposed to help you to become a better person. But it's been shown statistically that what deterrence does, it doesn't decrease recidivism. Of course, for various reasons, one of the primary reasons, and if you take my course in drugs and crimes, I elaborate on it, but I'll touch on it, is that individuals who are hooked on drugs will continue to commit crimes based upon the fact that they are simply trying to obtain funds to be able to satisfy their drug habits. And they will commit burglaries, they will commit robberies, they will commit thefts, they will commit all kinds of crime. And usually the intention is not to hurt anybody, but to get the money for those habits. The same thing with driving under the influence. In those situations, you know, if a person has an alcohol problem, you know, they will go to jail, and if that is not treated, they come out. If they don't participate in a program that helps them, then they're going to go back and they're going to repeat it again and may hurt someone, damage some property, and then the worst is kill somebody. So deterrence. Now, even some discussion which you'll find later that we talk about, I believe is in week 9, maybe even 10, that we deal with the issue of the death penalty. Now, I am contrary to what some people might believe based upon my story of my life, a fan of the death penalty. I am not, for 2 reasons. One reason I'm not a fan of the death penalty is because it doesn't operate for deterrence. The only one it deters is the person who's executed. So other people who see people who are on death row and subsequently they're executed, it doesn't deter them. That doesn't put a, as we use the term in the law, chilling effect. It doesn't, in other words, make you say, stop and think, ooh, I better not do this because I'm going to be subjected to the death penalty. No, it doesn't do that. And it only deters the individual who's executed. So deterrence is kind of like not so good in terms of it. You already know what my favorite is, rehabilitation. And the reason why I like rehabilitation is because it takes a person in another direction, and it provides an opportunity for that person to get a fresh start, and it moves people away. One of my favorite parts of rehabilitation for healthy people, that is, people who don't have drug problems or alcohol problems, is education, because it's been established that it is cheaper, one, to educate than to incarcerate. And then the other part of that is it's been shown that individuals who become more educated are less likely to commit crimes, or at least violent offenses. I've seen they go to white-collar crimes and things like that, but I'm talking about for the large numbers. Then people will commit crimes to feed themselves because they can't get jobs. Maybe they didn't have good enough education, or either in the field that they're working in there are problems, or that the pay is not very good, so they supplement it but with crime. But my point being is the more educated that individuals become, the less likely they will commit an offense. I was part of a program for years that was established, and you'll hear me talk about this time to time in Cook County and in room 702, which is now called the Layton Courthouse, Criminal Court Building, but it's the main criminal court building in Cook County, and the program was called Probation Challenge. And in that program, which was established by the late Judge R. Eugene Pincham, who is I call him my father in the law, I learned a lot of what I knew as a trial lawyer from sitting and observing him when he was a trial lawyer, and also listening to his advice because of the great amount of knowledge that he had. And then it was his probation officer, Reverend Harold Bailey, who's a friend of mine, and Reverend Bailey worked with him in that. And ultimately what happened is that the Probation Challenge project, which said that if you came before Judge Pincham in his courtroom, he had the option of giving you the opportunity to get an education by obtaining your GED if you had not, or going to jail. Now, if you chose the GED program and you went through and you successfully did it, you came back before the judge, all else being equal, then the case was dismissed. Now, these were not violent offenses, of course. These were non-violent offenses. And like I already said, that the ones that work with are those who don't have the substance abuse issues there, because they need the additional counseling and treatment for that. But the point of the matter is that what we discovered from that program is that there were individuals who not only got their GED, but later on they partnered with one of the junior colleges in Chicago, Olive Harvey in the south side of Chicago, and students were allowed to go there and participate in there and obtain associate's degrees. And then some went on and got bachelors at other institutions, and then they were pretty much removed from the crime scene. And then the other thing, and so then what happened ultimately is that one of the members of the board that was established for Probation Challenge, State Senator Howard Brookins, Senator Brookins took the legislation to the state Senate in Illinois, and ultimately the law was passed, and it is on the books and part of the Illinois Criminal Code as a sentencing option available for nonviolent offenders. So I presume it's still there, and I haven't looked lately. I know it was there when I left the practice, and I think I saw it a few years after that. So anyway, the point I'm saying is that goes with rehabilitation. Other things that go with it, like second chance, where employers are giving individuals an opportunity to, even with a criminal record, to help them out. And then the expungement laws that have come in to help individuals clean up their criminal background. So anyway, while I'm talking, since I'm talking about sentencing, and so again, back to deterrence, believing that the fear of being punished would operate as a deterring factor. And then it says exactly what I already said. We know in reality that many criminals are never caught and punished, which, by the way, listen to me good. I don't like the way they say this, and the reason why I don't is because criminals have to be caught in order to become criminals. The definition of a criminal is one who committed a crime, which meant that they were caught committing the offense. Criminals who commit crimes and never caught is an oxymoron, because they're not criminals, if you understand my point. So anyway, the point of the matter is deterrence doesn't work very well in that. Now others believe that incapacitation, that is, you lock people up and you isolate them, that would help. Well, as it says clearly, it doesn't assist anybody except for the time period that the person is incarcerated. And actually, to be honest with you, I tell people going to jail for long periods of time and or prison expose individuals, especially first-time offenders, and individuals who later on are discovered to be wrongfully convicted and have been in jail or for a long time or prison, that they adapt to the lifestyle of the criminals, and so that becomes who they are, and when they are released, that's what they know, and that's what they end up doing. So the point of the matter, and it says, research shows that incapacitation it shows that the incapacitation reduces recidivism. However, the research does not show that incapacitation reduces recidivism. Again, that's why I keep saying I'm a fan of rehabilitation. So here we are, right where I said, rehabilitation. We can change an offender's behavior, attitude, or character, and reduce their risk to offend, to reoffend, or become recidivist. And that seems to be the best. The only thing is that some people say, well, it doesn't work for everybody. None. There's no cookie cutter deal here. It's individuals and their desire or willingness to want to go in a new direction as well. Not a 360, but I call it 180. And the reason I say a 180, if you think about it, let's use the clock, for example, as a 12 o'clock to 6 o'clock. The bottom of the clock is 180. 12 o'clock to 3 o'clock is 45. And so what you do is you put 90. Is 90. And then the next one is you add the next from 3 to 6 is another 90, and that equals 180. So if you turn even with the first part from 1 to 3, you're still looking at where you are. If you get to 3, you can see where you got to go, but you also can still see where you've been. But if you get to 6, which is 180, then you're faced with a new direction. The closer you get back to 360 by using another 180, then you increase your chances because you begin to be able to see. So in other words, get a picture of this, that when you get to 6, you're facing away from the clock and the stuff is behind you, and you're looking out in front of you, and you have a new way of life. That's an illustration that I use in church all the time to explain to people why we say do it 180 as opposed to a 360. And so we want rehabilitation to be a 180. I hear people all the time and they don't even realize what they're saying. Oh, do a 360. Nah, it's not working. So anyway, many philosophies of punishment are, open and out here today. And the judges themselves have reached a stage where we get to the point when we actually get to sentencing based upon what the jurisdictional statutes have set forth. And sentences involve a debate between what's best, indeterminate or determinate sentencing. So, sentencing guidelines can limit a judge's discretion, which means that the judge has a range and they can't go under that range. For example, there are some crimes that individuals commit that the judge does not have the ability, if the person is found guilty or pleads guilty to offer them probation, supervision, or something less than jail time. However, though, the jurisdiction does allow the prosecutor to reduce the charges. So I'm speaking in terms of the prosecutor not reducing the charges so that the individual can be found sentence based upon the guidelines. Now, I have seen end arounds, and I'll talk about one in a few minutes. What I call end around is judges using a loophole. But so the guidelines that limit a judge's discretion, particularly when those guidelines include what I call presumptive sentencing, the judge's discretion can further be limited by mandatory minimums. And that is when you're moving towards determinate as opposed to indeterminate. So Illinois, as I speak, used to have indeterminate sentencing. But in 1977, House Bill 1500 came about, which I actually had a chance to do extensive research because as a senior law student, we had an assignment that we had to do to complete a major paper. And I chose mine on that change in the bill. And so what happened is out of that went from indeterminate to determinate sentencing, where we had things like Class X crimes, which sentenced an individual 6 to 30 years if they committed those crimes and were found guilty of those. We had habitual offenders, where if a person committed a crime, they called it the 3 strikes law, but they have to be violent offenses in those kind of situations. That's where it's intended. Now, there are some jurisdictions that require it not to be violent, and I think California is one. But anyway, the point of the matter is that we always thought that was troublesome because some of the nonviolent offenses were, many were because of the drug and alcohol problems that individuals had. So anyway, the point of the matter is that with the determinate sentencing, then the legislature pretty much tries to take the authority of the judges to change it. Now, what has happened in our determinate sentencing jurisdiction is that what the judge has done, as in the case of Jason Van Dyke, a police officer in Cook County who was charged with 16 counts of aggravated battery with a firearm, which came on later after the statute that we put together and that the legislature put together that I researched in 1977 in House Bill 1500. But an extension of that added aggravated battery with a firearm, and that was in a Class X because of the firearms. As you know, we have a firearms problem here, okay? But the point of the matter is that there also, this guy was also found guilty of the 16 counts, which each one should have carried 6 to 30, and also with a person being found guilty of that, good time didn't apply as rapidly as with other offenses. So the other offense that the officer was charged with and found guilty was second-degree murder. And he was found guilty of that. And what the judge did, and second-degree murder in the statute, gave the judge, gave him an opening. He could have sentenced that man to probation, but he did not, because it would have been pretty bad for the people of Cook County and the state of Illinois. So, because this was a police officer who, in the process of his duty, was basically guilty of excessive force. And so it would have created some real rifts between the community, which already exists, but more of a rift and in between the community and law enforcement. So instead, he was found guilty, and the judge had a range that he could sentence him to, and he sentenced him to the lower part of it, which equaled to, rather than doing probation, he gave him 7. But that particular second-degree murder also dealt with good time, which cut it in half. So basically, it meant 3.5 years, which it's something that takes me flashback to what I told you about what happened with the guy who killed my father and mother when he was sentenced to 10 years, which meant 5, and for good behavior he'd serve 3.5 years because a year and a half was knocked off. So anyway, the bottom line is that judges still can do that. So, but the key thing in determinate sentencing is that the legislature sets out parameters that the judge has to follow. In indeterminate, the judge has a wider range of options that they can use there. So as you conduct your research, you will discover what your jurisdiction has. Now, it's important to understand, though, that as it says here, that many sentencing options in corrections that they have to carry out and enforce these laws in both the community. So you have probation and parole included there. And as you know or will know, probation is a sentence where you don't go to jail at all. You go to jail maybe while waiting, but you're not sentenced to the penitentiary, and you're able to serve your time outside in the community under the supervision of a probation officer that you have to report to and all of that, but we'll get into more details on that, as this is one of the 4 options that you have for your research, for your project. And then parole, on the other hand, by the name parole, indicates that the individual serves some time and then is released in the community to serve the rest of their time under the you can have the same kind of parameters with instead of a probation officer, you have a parole officer. And then in some jurisdictions, they don't use that term. Illinois really doesn't use it. They use what they call mandatory supervised release. But the vehicle is intended to operate the same way. And many jurisdictions across the country have gone in that direction. And then the other 2, institutional for sentencing, sends you to jail. As you already know, jail is for short term. You did your research, you wrote your papers in week 1, and jail is intended for individuals who commit crimes that basically, to be honest with you, should be misdemeanors or felonies that they qualify for probation, and so then they're released. Now, remember one thing: when you go to jail and you're released, that you can still be under the supervision of the probation officer, but not parole. Prison and also jails are generally pretty close to the courthouse, and that's where you spend your time. Okay, Cook County, the jail and the courthouse is on the same area. Same thing here, where I am here in Will County. The Will County Jail is right behind the courthouse, and then many of the jurisdictions outside in other counties have it as well, set up that way. And then you get to prison. As for longer terms, where individuals spend more than a year, and then of course, when you're released from there, you're released under, if you're released early, that is, and many are, then you're released under the supervision of the parole officer in those settings. And so that's pretty much how sentencing operates there. Okay, so I think I made it pretty clear. And so now, with the time that we have left, I want to, oops, I don't want to do that. I don't want to do that. I want to go back. Give me a minute. I meant to hit this. I didn't want to check for updates. I want to allow it. Okay. So it just gives terminology here, and these are sentencing definitions. And so you can go through this on your own, but I'm just going to show you what general deterrence is. We've talked about that, and all it really simply is if you flip the card over, it takes punishment to prevent others from committing crimes, and the idea is that the more severe you punish, the less likely you'll commit the offense or contemplate future criminal acts. We already told you that in practice, it really doesn't work very well. Specific deterrence. Anytime you hear the word deterrence, it's going to have the same outcome. Focus on the individual, and that that individual should learn that crime does not pay as a result of a harsh penalty. It doesn't work. The only deterring individuals here are those who are actually not sentenced on death row, but actually are executed because they're dead and they're not going to commit offenses. But people who see it happening, doesn't change them. They don't give them anything to think about. They continue to commit crime for various other reasons. Selective incapacitation. Repeat offenders are sentenced to longer prison terms. So what it means is that the more you return back as a recidivist or repeat offender, the longer your sentence will be. Of course, it goes to the max of what the law says in that jurisdiction for whatever the crime is that you committed. So again, the problem there. So now let's get to my favorite and the one I think that works. Changing an offender's behavior, attitudes, beliefs to diminish them. Coming out with a new person, coming out with a new creature. That's a biblical concept, but it works in real life as well. Outside of the, I don't like the term religious, but that's what people use, realm. But the point of the matter is that that individual gets a new look at life for some of the reasons that I talked about already that I won't repeat here. Just desserts. Now, it sounds like exactly, we just say you get what's coming to you. Punishment is commensurate with the seriousness of the offense. So if your offense is serious that you committed, then the punishment should measure up to that. For minor crimes, you should get less time. For major crimes, you get more time. And that's pretty much the way the law is written as well. And dealing with misdemeanors where the person is sentenced to at least up to a year and or a fine, and then jumping over to the next day, which would be a year or more, and or a fine would be felonies. Okay. Restorative justice, you are writing about that, and the word itself helps you. Preparing the harm done, offender makes amends for the harm or loss to the victim and or community. And you could do that with community service. You do that also with fines and things of that nature. That's restorative service. So what you're doing is you're paying a price that is tangible, that the community gets some kind of benefit from it. And like I said, community service is one of the things that fit within there. Equity goal of punishment. Flip it over and you hear it, see it. Offenders must pay back victims for their loss. It fits almost with restorative justice and the system for the cost of processing their case and society for the disruption of their crimes. And this is part of a sentence that a judge can issue out to an individual. The key is to, Chicago is attempting to do something like that with the Jesse Smollett case. However, they're going to have to do it in a civil suit because the charges were dismissed. So that's what they're operating on. Okay, so it wouldn't be the same as equity goal of punishment. It's the city is trying to recoup, and so they're filing a civil suit to do that. So it's not equity goal of punishment. It goes with the actual sentence an individual might have. Part of that with the Smollett case and the equity goal of punishment is that he gave up $10,000, which some people say that's nothing. Well, I mean, they're looking at the start and all that stuff. But the point of the matter is that he did forfeit it. So that was part of the deal that he had in order to get the charges dismissed. So that fits within the equity goal of punishment. Don't make people happy, but it did. That's what happened. Concurrent. Concurrent, very simply, is something that means that the sentences run together. You have to have at least 2 sentences for something to run concurrent. And they begin on the same day, completed when the longest sentence has run. So, for example, if a person commits 2 crimes and they're found guilty of them, then the crime that they are sentenced under runs together at the same time. So in other words, they may serve part of that day for the aggravated battery. They might charge the other part for second degree murder or whatever. The bottom line is that there are 2 crimes and they're side by side. I know for a fact that an individual was sentenced to what everybody thought was 120 years, but what it was is that individual was sentenced to 4 30-year terms, and each of those 30-year terms ran concurrent. So it actually meant 30 years as opposed to 120, and with good time, it actually meant 15, and then with further good time, it meant 12 or 13 years. So concurrent is when the sentencings run parallel. Okay. On the other hand, consecutive sentencing is what it says. You finish one and you start the other. The police officer convicted for murdering his ex-wife, Drew Peterson, a Bolingbrook police officer, was sentenced to so many years. And then what happened is that he committed a crime where he was found guilty of after that while he was in jail, in prison, he attempted to hire someone to assassinate the prosecutor who prosecuted him, which was a terrible move. And he was found guilty of that with a separate trial. So that means that he's going to have to finish the first one before he does the second one. And that's what it means by that. So it doesn't run together. You finish one and then you start the other one. Okay? Determinate sentencing, we already kind of talked about that, but a fixed term of years, the maximum established by law. That's what I was saying, as opposed to the judge setting it. Indeterminate sentencing permits early release from a correctional institution after the offender serves the required minimum portion. And judges are more flexible in terms of the sentence that they can give an individual there. Okay. Again, Illinois is not it used to be an indeterminate sentence state, and then, so you're going to have to write a paper about indeterminate and determinate sentencing, what it is and which one your state has, and then why you like the one they have or why you disagree with it and what you think would be better. Sentencing guidelines are very simply what the courts look at in terms of the severity of the crime plus the offender's criminal background. Whenever an individual is sentenced, there is ordered what we call a PSI, which is a pre-sentence investigation, which is conducted by the probation officers department. And what they do is they research the criminal history of the individual, also what kind of person that they've been, have they not been in trouble, those kind of things. And they submit the education level, individual, and then that's taken into consideration. And the court here in Illinois, and this is one of the things that came out of House Bill 1500, was if an individual, they have aggravating and mitigating factors that are also used in the determinant process. And what that means is that the aggravating factors are, the heinous crime, this is a repeat offender, and so forth. So you get closer to the max. So if you got 6 to 30 in a Class X, you will be moving closer to 30 if it's a heinous or serious offense. if it's you've not been in trouble and so forth and so on, and then you do commit a crime that does fall under Class X, and the prosecution didn't reduce it, and you're pleading guilty or found guilty, then you could get the minimum, but you won't get probation or supervision because the fact that you've never been in trouble before, so you're still going to end up going to jail for that. And that's how that works. So the key thing is what the sentencing guidelines do is establish a means to try to give parity to the overall penalty that an individual receives for crimes that they commit. Presumptive sentencing guidelines: legislature sets the penalties for criminal acts. So you already know what it is, like 6 to 30 for Class X's. I think we got just a few more. 3 strikes law, I talked about that. That is, repeat offenders receive long sentences with no parole for conviction of a 3rd or more felony. And like I said again, it's pretty much been established that it's a violent offense. I think it's unfair for an individual who commits an offense, like for example, let's say, use the example of a felony we discovered, this felony disorderly conduct that Jesse Smollett was sentenced, had before him. And let's say he did this another time. Well, what the judges might do is then sentence him to jail time, and he won't have the opportunity for for parole, and you will go to prison for a number of years. But it's based on repeat offenders. That's what it is. And so you know why that they call it the 3 strikes law is because the old saying in baseball is 3 strikes, you're out. The only time strikes are good is in golf. I mean, not golf, bowling. That's we call them turkeys, for those who bowl. Truth in sentencing, which is something that we wanted to try to establish down through the years, and we kind of have that. There's a lot of it in the federal court for years, but in the state court it requires offenders to serve big portions of their sentence and to reduce the discrepancy between the sentence and the actual time served. So in other words, you're not going to just get out after serving a short period, but you're going to serve a half or more. And that's what that concept stands for. And that's the end of that. And that is also the end of this week's lecture. Okay. And so what I wanted to remind you again is make sure that you complete those assignments on time. If you have any questions, reach out to me. And I hope that this last hour has been beneficial and helpful to you. So I'm going to say good night. I will see you in 2 weeks, which is the 24th, when we have our next lecture in this class. So good night.